Hello, horror fans. Today I will tell you a scary story that will shock you. I warn you, children, stay away from the screens. This story is full of paranormal events.
The air smelled of rot, of something too far gone to ever be restored. Every breath I took felt like inhaling the very essence of death itself. But I had to press on. The forest around me was silent, too silent. There should have been the usual chirping of birds, the rustle of small animals, the hum of life. But instead, it was eerily still. Only the wind whispered through the trees, a cold, unnatural wind that cut through my jacket and made my bones ache. I had read about Chernobyl. Everyone had. The nuclear disaster, the abandoned villages, the eerie silence of the place where human life once flourished. But none of it had prepared me for what lay within that forsaken forest. The stories about mutants, the rumors whispered in hushed tones, none of them seemed real until I had to face it firsthand. I'm not a fool. I knew the dangers of venturing into this cursed place. I knew what was rumored to lurk in the shadows of Chernobyl, but I thought I could handle it. I thought the stories were just that, stories. Until I met the thing. It started innocently enough. A brief hike into the forest, a desire to document the decayed remnants of the past. But it didn't take long before I began to feel watched. The weight of something unseen, pressing down on my chest, as if the very forest itself was alive and aware of my presence. I shouldn't have ignored the signs. The hairs standing on the back of my neck, the sudden chill that gripped my spine, the absence of wildlife. The forest should have been teeming with creatures, even if they were mutated by radiation. But there was nothing. Not even the occasional crack of a twig beneath a small animal's foot, and then I heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural. My heart pounded in my chest as I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I didn't. I couldn't. Curiosity got the better of me, and I turned toward the sound, my flashlight trembling in my grip. That's when I saw it. First, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. A shadow, hulking and unnatural, moving between the trees. But then, the shape became clearer. It had 3 heads, each one more grotesque than the last. The first was human-like, twisted by disease and radiation, its skin hanging in loose folds, eyes glowing an unnatural yellow. The second was a jagged mass of twisted, decayed flesh, half of it melted away, with teeth that stretched far too long for any animal. And the third was a nightmare in itself. Its eyes were lifeless, sunken deep into its skull, and its mouth was nothing more than a gaping wound filled with rows of sharp, razor-like teeth. It didn't make a sound. Not at first. It just stood there, staring at me, its 3 heads twitching in unison. And then it moved. I ran. Every ounce of energy left in my body pushed me to sprint, to flee. I could hear it following, its steps heavy and deliberate, but it never made a sound. It was like it was toying with me, savoring the fear in my heart. The thing was close now, too close, and I knew, deep down, that if it caught me, I wouldn't survive to tell anyone about it. But somehow, by some miracle, I made it out of the forest. I stumbled through the trees, my legs giving out beneath me as I collapsed on the edge of the forest, gasping for air. I don't remember how long I lay there, fighting to breathe, my body trembling from exhaustion and terror, and that's when I realized the most horrifying truth of all: it was still out there. Watching. Waiting. I had barely escaped with my life. The forest had felt alive, like something ancient and forgotten had woken up the moment I set foot in it. But when I thought I was free, I realized the nightmare had only just begun. The following days blurred together. I stayed at a small abandoned structure on the edge of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, a forgotten shack used by some tourists before the world realized just how dangerous the area truly was. The place was falling apart, but it was all I had. The walls were thin, and the wind whistled through the cracks, but at least it was shelter. Or so I thought. I tried to convince myself that what I had seen was just a figment of my imagination, a trick of the mind born out of exhaustion and the overwhelming desolation of the place. But the scars on my hands, the deep scratches, the burns that didn't seem to heal, were real. And the nightmares. The nightmares wouldn't let me sleep, haunting me even when my eyes were shut. The 3-headed creature haunted every waking moment, its eyes still burning into my soul. I couldn't stay still. I couldn't escape the feeling that it was always just behind me, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I knew deep down that it would find me, no matter where I went. The monster wasn't just in the forest, it was inside me now. The fear had taken root. I set out again, foolishly, trying to gather the strength to face it. I had nothing to lose at this point. The forest called to me, beckoning me into its depths. It felt like a test. A final stand. I wandered deeper this time, past the remnants of old villages and forgotten homes, where the ghosts of the past seemed to linger in the air. There was no escape from the oppression of the place, the overwhelming sense that something was watching, waiting. And then, just as the sun dipped behind the trees, I heard it again, the growl. The deep, rumbling growl that made my heart freeze in my chest. I was no longer alone. I spun around, but this time, I was ready. My flashlight shook in my hands, but I held it firm, sweeping the beam through the trees. There, just beyond the light, the creature stood, its three heads twitching, its eyes gleaming with hunger. The air thickened with a heavy, nauseating smell of decay. It moved toward me slowly, deliberately. Each step was like a death sentence, the ground beneath it cracking under the weight of its monstrous form. I could hear it breathing, each inhalation was ragged, labored, as though it had suffered just as much as the world around it. The thing didn't make a sound as it approached, but the fear I felt in its presence was deafening. It was close now, so close I could feel its putrid breath on my skin, and then it spoke, not in words, but in a low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate deep within my chest. It wasn't just a creature, it was something more, something ancient. The sickness that had transformed it had twisted its very essence. It was aware of me, aware of the terror it instilled in my heart. And it relished it. I knew that if I didn't act, if I didn't do something, I would end up as just another casualty of the Chernobyl curse. In a desperate moment of panic, I ran. I didn't look back, didn't listen to the whispers of the forest, the scratching of branches against my skin, the sounds of something following me just out of reach. My legs screamed in protest, but I pushed forward, my feet stumbling over the uneven ground. The forest seemed to stretch forever, as though it was never ending, as if the world itself had been twisted by whatever lay within it. I found myself back at the old shack I had first taken refuge in, breathless and shaking. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't rest. The thing had followed me, and now I was trapped. I knew it would find me again, that there was no hiding, no safety in this forsaken place, but there was one thing I had to figure out: how had it survived all this time? How was it still alive, and more importantly, why had it chosen me? I couldn't escape. That thought had taken root in my mind, and it was all I could think about as the days stretched on. The fear had begun to suffocate me, clouding every thought, every decision. The monster, the thing with three heads, wasn't just hunting me, it was toying with me. It had made its mark on my soul, and now it had become a part of me. I could feel its presence even when it wasn't there, lurking just beyond my consciousness, waiting for the moment when it would claim me. I spent the next few days preparing for what I knew was inevitable. I had no weapons, no allies, and no escape route. The forest, vast and endless, had become my prison. The shack I had once used for shelter now felt like a tomb, every creak of the old wood echoing like the slow march of death. I was losing myself. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its three faces, their twisted, diseased forms forever etched into my memory. The growls. The whispers. The way it watched me, as if it knew everything about me, as if it had been there from the start, always present in the dark corners of my mind. I had to face it. I had no choice. I couldn't live like this anymore, haunted by something I didn't fully understand. If I was going to die, I would die fighting. It was the only shred of dignity I had left. I ventured back into the heart of the forest, deeper this time than I had ever dared before. The trees grew thicker, the air heavier with the stench of decay. The forest was closing in on me, suffocating me with its twisted beauty. And then, I heard it, that low growl, the one that seemed to shake the very ground beneath me. I wasn't ready for it. But I had no choice. I turned to face it. The creature was there, standing in the shadows, its three heads slowly swiveling to fixate on me. The glow of its eyes pierced the darkness, and I could feel the weight of its gaze upon me, like it was reading my soul. The moment I had feared was here. It wasn't the same as before. This time, there was no hesitation, no delay. The creature stepped forward, each movement slow but deliberate. Its breathing grew louder, its twisted form growing larger in the flickering light of my flashlight. Their heads, each more grotesque than the last, seemed to take on a life of their own as they turned to watch me, their eyes full of malice and hunger. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I couldn't. There was no escaping this, no way out. It was my fate, and I would face it head on. I pulled the small knife I had salvaged from the shack. It was laughable, really. A tiny blade against a creature that had been born from the worst horrors humanity had ever unleashed. But it was all I had. And if it was my end, I was going to make it fight for it. The creature lunged, its first head snapped forward, jaws wide, teeth gnashing. I barely had time to react, stumbling backward as the first head missed me by inches. But then the second head followed, its teeth catching my arm as I tried to dodge. Pain exploded in my body, and I cried out, but I didn't let it slow me down. I slashed with the knife, aiming for the creature's exposed neck. The blade barely made a mark, but it was enough to make it recoil. It hesitated, just for a moment. Long enough for me to scramble to my feet and backpedal. I could feel the blood running down my arm, my vision swimming with pain, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop, but the creature wasn't done. The third head lunged toward me, and I barely had time to raise my arm to block it. The teeth sank into my side, and I screamed. The world went black at the edges of my vision as the pain consumed me, and then, in the chaos, I realized something. The creature wasn't just attacking me. It was testing me. It wasn't trying to kill me outright, it wanted me to suffer. It wanted to break me. And in some twisted way, it had succeeded. I let the knife drop. I let the darkness close in. The creature's breath grew louder, its growl filling my ears as I felt its weight press down on me, its three heads each watching me in their own horrifying way, and then, just as I thought it was over, I felt something I hadn't expected, a shift in the air. A sudden crack of light broke through the dense trees above, shining down into the clearing where I lay. The monster hissed in pain, recoiling from the light as if it had been burned. The thing wasn't invincible. It had weaknesses. The light intensified, like some unnatural force had entered the forest. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, piercing scream that reverberated through the trees. Its heads writhed, twisted, and finally, with one last agonizing cry, the thing collapsed to the ground in a heap of decaying flesh. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was too broken, too drained. But I could feel the weight of the creature's presence lift. The nightmare was over. I wasn't sure how long I lay there. Time didn't make sense in this forsaken place. But eventually, I dragged myself to my feet. The forest, once suffocating and oppressive, now felt empty, hollow. I had survived, but at what cost? The forest had taken so much from me. It had changed me. And I would never be the same. I made my way back, unsure of where I was going or even if I could make it. The Chernobyl Exclusion Zone still lay before me, but now, it felt different. The shadows were no longer alive with the terror of that thing. But the question still lingered in my mind: what had created it? And was I the last to see its horrors, or was there more lurking in the depths of the forest, waiting for the next lost soul to wander too far?